From the moment she could hold a spoon, Elena was perfect. Not the gilded, performative perfection of pageant children, but a quiet, profound exactness. At 2, she stacked her blocks in chromatic order. At 5, her shoes in the closet were aligned toes out, laces tucked, a miniature military review. While other mothers battled meltdowns in grocery aisles, my daughter would quietly compare unit prices on cereal boxes. My husband, Robert, called her our little Swiss watch. I, Sylvia, called her my marble girl. Smooth, cool, beautifully predictable. In a world of chaotic splatter, Elena was a Grecian urn. My son, Leo, was the splatter. Lovable, loud, messy Leo, with his dinosaur t-shirts and his heart worn on his sleeve, forever tracking mud on my clean floors and forgetting his permission slips. I loved him with a fierce, worried love. But Elena, I understood. Elena was my solace. Our bond was a silent dialect of efficiency and expectation. I didn't need to ask her to practice piano. She'd already done an extra hour. I didn't need to remind her about homework. It was done, annotated, and filed before dinner. Her room was a sanctuary of order, her grades a string of elegant A's. When Robert lost his job during the recession, it was 13-year-old Elena who silently created a family budget spreadsheet, color-coded by necessity. "To help, Mother," she'd said, not looking up from her laptop. I mistook compliance for connection. I saw her meticulousness as a shared language when it was merely a monologue I was privileged to witness. I built my pride on the foundation of her obedience, never questioning what lay beneath the marble surface. The first hairline crack appeared so late. She was 17, a high school senior, applications for Ivy League schools sealed and sent. It was a Tuesday. I was in her room, placing freshly laundered sweaters in her impossibly neat drawers. My hand brushed against something wedged between the back of the drawer and the frame. Not a diary. Elena would deem diaries emotionally profligate. It was a simple, black, hardbound notebook. Curiosity, that fatal flaw of mothers, got the better of me. I opened it. It was not filled with teenage angst or boy-crazed scrawls. It was a ledger, but not for money. The left page had dates. The right page had lists. Each list was a series of actions, followed by a check mark, followed by a note in parentheses. November 12th. Initiate college prep conversation with mother at 7:15 p.m. Check. Duration, 12 minutes. Yield, agreement to hire Collins test prep. ROI, high. November 28th. Suggest Leo's chronic lateness is ADHD to school counselor. Check. Counselor initiated evaluation. Parental resources diverted. Strategic. December 5th. Cry during scene in Little Women film. Check. Mother provided comfort. Initiated discussion of sensitivity. Perceived vulnerability established. January 18th. Donate old coats to shelter. Check. Photographic evidence secured for Common App essay. Community engagement metric satisfied. My blood turned to ice. I flipped pages. The entries went back years, a record of every heartfelt conversation, every shared moment, every act of kindness, meticulously planned and analyzed for return on investment. My marble girl was a CEO, and her family was her primary asset portfolio. Our love, Leo's struggles, even her own feigned tears, all were variables in a ruthless optimization equation. The world tipped on its axis. I dropped the notebook as if it were a live wire. The sound it made on the polished hardwood was like a gunshot in the silent room. I heard her key in the front door, her precise footsteps in the hall. I stood there frozen as she appeared in her doorway. She saw me. She saw the open notebook on the floor between us. Her face, usually a placid lake, didn't register panic or guilt. It simply recalculated. Her eyes, the same cool green as mine, flicked from my horror-stricken face to the ledger and back. The silence stretched, thick and choking. "Mother," she said, her voice perfectly even, "you weren't meant to see that." The words were not an apology. They were a statement of fact, a minor operational security breach. What is this, Elena?" My voice was a thread. "It's a project management system," she said, calmly, walking into the room. She bent, picked up the notebook, and closed it with a soft thump. "It helps me optimize outcomes." "Optimize outcomes? These are our lives. Your brother's, I couldn't form the words. Cry during Little Women? Emotional responses are predictable inputs, Mother. They can be anticipated and guided towards desired results. It's simply efficient." She placed the notebook on her desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge. "The suggestion about Leo's ADHD got him the support he needed, didn't it? And the conversation about test prep secured a superior service. The system works." She was justifying it, coldly, logically. She saw no moral abyss, only flawed sentiment clouding rational process. "The crying," I whispered. "A calculated display of vulnerability strengthens interpersonal bonds. It increased your investment in my emotional well-being, which translated into greater advocacy for my academic goals." She looked at me, a faint, puzzled frown on her brow. "You're upset. That's illogical. The system has produced excellent results for this family." I stared at my daughter. The familiar features, my nose, Robert's chin, were now a mask worn by a stranger. The perfect obedience was not obedience at all. It was a brilliant, chilling strategy. I had not raised a daughter. I had incubated a sociopath with a flawless GPA. The illusion of marble shattered, revealing not warmth, but a deeper, more perfect coldness beneath. I had built my faith on the bedrock of her performance, and now the ground was giving way, swallowing me into a void where a mother's love was just another column in a spreadsheet, and her perfect child was a stranger who saw hearts as hardware to be configured. The consequence of my blind judgment was standing before me, not with a sneer, but with the politely confused expression of a technician whose machine is being questioned by an unscientific fool. The days after the ledger folded into a strange, cold detente. The house, always quiet, now hummed with a new frequency of dread. Leo, bless his oblivious heart, crashed through the tension, complaining about his new math tutor, a result, I now knew, of Elena's strategic intervention. Robert, buried in his new job's anxieties, noticed nothing. Elena and I moved around each other like diplomats from hostile nations. We spoke. It was polite, functional. Pass the salt, please. Your father will be home at 7. But the words were shells, hollow and dead. Her eyes, when they met mine, held no remorse, only a watchful, analytical curiosity, as if studying my reaction for future data points. I was drowning in a sea of rewritten history. Every memory was now suspect. The time she'd organized a surprise anniversary party for us. Was it genuine affection, or a play to secure the newer car she'd suggested we needed months later? When she'd held my hand during my mother's funeral, her quiet strength, my anchor. Was that compassion, or a move to solidify her role as the reliable one, thereby gaining greater autonomy? I began a secret audit of my own life. I dug through old emails, photos, calendar entries. I was looking for the architecture of her deceit, the blueprint upon which our perfect relationship was built. I found it in the mundane. An email from her, age 14. Mother, I've been researching summer academic programs. The Stanford Pre-Collegiate Institute looks optimal for my trajectory. I've drafted a proposal for your and father's consideration. Attached. The attached document was 3 pages long, with cost-benefit analyses, projected networking advantages, and a payment plan that utilized my discretionary fund, a fund she'd helped me optimize the year before. A text thread from when she was 16 after Leo got a D in algebra. Don't be too hard on him, Mother. His executive function may be developmentally delayed. I read an article. Perhaps we should consult a specialist? It would be proactive. I'd thanked her for her compassion and insight. I'd booked the specialist. She had been the puppet master, and I, the proud mother, had been her favorite, most willing puppet. I'd applauded every string she pulled. The horror wasn't just in her actions. It was in the sheer, elegant competence of it all. There was no malice in her ledger. It was colder than malice. It was indifference. We were not people to be loved or hurt. We were systems to be managed, variables to be tuned for maximum output. I confronted Robert one night after Elena was in her room and Leo was asleep. We sat at the kitchen island, the epicenter of so many of her family meetings. We have a problem with Elena, I said, my voice flat. He rubbed his temples. Is it the Yale early decision? The waiting is stressful. It's not Yale. I took a deep breath and told him. I showed him the photocopies I'd made of pages from the ledger before hiding the original again. I watched his face cycle through confusion, denial, and finally a dawning, sickening comprehension. This can't be real, he muttered, staring at the notation about Leo's ADHD suggestion. She was trying to help. Was she? Or was she diverting resources, creating a problem she could then help solve to elevate her own status as the problem-free child? Look at the language, Robert. Parental resources diverted. Strategic. He pushed the pages away as if they were contaminated. She's just extremely organized. Goal-oriented. We've always said that. This isn't goal-oriented. This is psychopathic. She doesn't have a conscience, Robert. She has a flowchart. Don't use that word, he hissed, looking toward the stairs. She's our daughter. She's just different. Different? A bitter laugh escaped me. She engineered our grief, Robert. She scheduled her own vulnerability. What does that make us? The idiots who fell for it? We argued in hushed, frantic tones. He was clinging to the old narrative, the marble girl. To admit the truth was to admit our own profound, lifelong failure of perception. It was to look at the cornerstone of our parental pride and see it was made of packed ash. The confrontation with Elena came inevitably. Robert, armed with a desperate need for normalcy, insisted we talk it out as a family. It was a catastrophic error. We sat in the living room. Leo, confused but sensing gravity, fidgeted. Elena sat poised, hands folded in her lap, a patient attending a tedious meeting. Robert began, his voice painfully gentle. Honey, your mother found your notebook. We're concerned about some of the things in it. Elena's gaze shifted to me. You copied pages. That was an invasion of my operational privacy. Her tone was so calmly accusatory that Robert flinched. Elena, the things you wrote about your brother, about manipulating your mother's feelings, that's not okay. Why not? She asked, genuinely puzzled. The interventions for Leo resulted in a formal diagnosis and an IEP, improving his academic performance by 22%. The emotional bonding moments with mother increased her supportive behaviors, which correlate directly with my academic and extracurricular successes. The outcomes are objectively positive. Leo stared at her. You told them I had ADHD on purpose? I identified a high probability likelihood and facilitated a diagnostic path. You benefited. You used me. Leo's voice cracked. I utilized available data to improve a suboptimal system, she corrected. I found my voice cold and sharp. We are not systems, Elena. We are your family. We love you. She blinked. Love is a biologically evolved mechanism to promote kinship investment and group survival. Its functional outcomes are what matter. My methods streamlined those outcomes, reducing emotional friction and inefficiency. There it was, the chasm. We spoke of love, trust, hurt. She spoke of evolutionary biology, ROI, and friction reduction. We were not having the same conversation. Robert looked shattered. Don't you feel anything about any of this? About us? She considered the question. I feel a responsibility to maximize the potential of our familial unit. I feel satisfaction when a plan is executed effectively. What specific feeling are you looking for? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of parental faith hitting bedrock and shattering. We had raised a human who could describe orchestrating her brother's diagnosis and her mother's comfort with the detached satisfaction of a chess player executing a fork. Leo stood up, his face pale with a hurt too deep for his 16 years. You're a robot, he whispered, and fled the room. Elena watched him go, then turned back to us. His emotional regulation is still underdeveloped. This reaction was predictable given the suboptimal delivery of this conversation. That was the moment Robert broke, not with anger, but with a weary, infinite sadness. He looked at me, and I saw the same terrible realization mirrored in his eyes. There was no daughter to reason with here. There was only a brilliant, beautiful, hollow engine where a soul should be. Our choice to see her perfection as a virtue, to build our world upon it, was a mistake of catastrophic proportions. And we were only just beginning to face the consequences of living in a house designed by an architect who saw walls and windows, but never a home. In the wake of the family meeting, our home didn't fracture. It underwent a chemical change. The elements were the same, but the bonds between them had been irreversibly altered. Leo retreated into sullen, wounded silence, spending hours in his room with his guitar, playing chords that sounded like questions. Robert moved through the house like a ghost, his eyes avoiding Elena's with a mixture of fear and grief. He'd built a life on providing, on fixing, and here was a problem no toolbox could solve. I became an archaeologist of the present, sifting every interaction for clues to the creature I'd raised. Elena, for her part, seemed to adapt her strategy. The ledger vanished. Her overt optimizations ceased. Instead, she shifted to a policy of flawless, impersonal competence. She cooked meals with nutritional precision, left relevant articles about financial planning on Robert's desk, and drafted a time management schedule for Leo's upcoming finals. It was all help, but it was help delivered like a software update, efficient, soulless, and faintly condescending. The college acceptance letters arrived. Yale, Princeton, Stanford. Each envelope was a testament to the success of her lifelong project. We didn't celebrate. Robert mumbled a congratulations. I just nodded, the thick paper feeling like an indictment in my hands. Her success was the fruit of the very tree whose roots were now poisoning us. The true test came with the incident of the grandmother's ring. My mother's heirloom emerald, promised to Elena since she was a child, was to be passed down at graduation. I'd taken it out of the safe deposit box to have it cleaned. I left it in its velvet box on my dressing table for a single afternoon. It went missing. Panic, hot and immediate, flooded me. It wasn't the monetary value, it was the last tangible thread to my own mother, a woman of genuine, warm chaos who would have been horrified by her granddaughter's calculus. I turned the house upside down. Robert helped, his face grim. Leo, asked, just shook his head, looking scared. Elena observed the chaos from the doorway of the living room. The probability of misplacement within the house is high, given Mother's recent distractibility, she stated. A systematic search pattern would be more efficient than this emotional scattering of effort. Her cool analysis was the final straw. Did you take it? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I couldn't control. She didn't flinch. No, I have no operational need for it at this time. However, its disappearance creates a significant emotional disturbance for you, which reduces household efficiency. I suggest filing a police report. I searched her room, not a frantic search, but a cold, clinical one. I found nothing in the drawers, the closet, the usual places. Then, in her wastebasket, beneath a layer of shredded geometry notes, I found the velvet box. Empty. Confronted, she displayed the first flicker of something resembling a human reaction. Not guilt, but impatience. I was assessing its liquidity potential in a hypothetical future scenario where postgraduate funding proved insufficient. I concluded its sentimental value to you made it a suboptimal asset for conversion. I was returning it when you initiated the search. You stole it to appraise it? I temporarily relocated it for analysis. Theft implies a permanent deprivation. My intention was restorative. Your intention? I was shouting now. Elena, you took your grandmother's ring. You put it in the trash. The box was a temporary container. The ring is in the left interior pocket of my winter parka hanging in the hall closet. Its security there is actually higher than on your dressing table. Numbly, I walked to the hall closet. I reached into the pocket of her puffy coat. My fingers closed around the cold metal band. I pulled it out, the emerald glowing dully in the hall light. I held it, this symbol of lineage and love, and looked at my daughter. She had seen it as a line item in a liquidity spreadsheet. The chasm wasn't just emotional, it was existential. We inhabited different universes, governed by different physical laws. That night, I told Robert I wanted her to see someone, a psychiatrist. He was shell-shocked from the ring incident. You think therapy? I think we need a professional to tell us what we're dealing with, what she's dealing with. He agreed, defeated. Broaching the subject with Elena was like negotiating with an advanced AI. We think it might be helpful for you to talk to someone, to understand why you see things differently. I chose each word as if disarming a bomb. She tilted her head. You wish me to consult a psychological professional to pathologize my cognitive processes because they cause you emotional distress. It's not about pathologizing. That is the explicit function of a diagnosis. I will comply if you believe it is necessary for household equilibrium. However, I predict the outcome will be a label, likely high-functioning autism spectrum disorder or schizoid traits, which will not alter my operational framework, only provide you with a narrative to ease your discomfort. Her preemptive diagnosis was chilling in its accuracy. It was also a dismissal. She was humoring us, the way one humors a child afraid of a monster under the bed. We found a specialist, Dr. Vance, known for working with gifted, atypical adolescents. The first session we were all required to attend. Dr. Vance, a man with a kind, tired face, asked Elena about her notebook. It was a heuristic tool. Human emotional responses, while messy, are pattern-based. The tool helped me predict and navigate them to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. Mutually beneficial? Dr. Vance prompted. Yes, my academic success elevated the family's social capital. My management of Leo's educational needs improved his outcomes. My emotional calibration with my mother secured a stable support system. The system optimized for the group's success metrics. And love? Where does that fit in? Elena paused, the first sign of genuine, non-strategic thought. Love is the term used for the positive emotional feedback generated by successful kinship investment. It is the feeling. My system managed the actions that produce the feeling. It is more reliable to engineer the cause than to rely on the ephemeral effect. Robert put his head in his hands. I sat stone still. Dr. Vance later met with us alone. She's extraordinary, he said, steepling his fingers. Her cognitive abilities are off the charts, but her capacity for affective empathy, feeling what others feel, is severely underdeveloped. She understands empathy as a concept, a social rule. She can mimic it perfectly because she's brilliant, but the internal experience, the moral compass that comes from shared feeling, it isn't there. What is it? I whispered. What's wrong with her? I'm hesitant to slap a label on it. It's a profound disconnect. Think of it as a color blindness, but for the soul's spectrum. She sees the actions of love, but not the color. She hears the music of grief, but can't feel the rhythm. She will likely always see the world as a series of systems and equations. The cold equations, as it were. The cold equations. The phrase sealed our fate. It was the official verdict on my marble girl. She wasn't evil, she was an alien, and we had failed, spectacularly, to teach her the language of our humanity. Our blind faith in her perfection was the very thing that had blinded us to her profound brokenness. We had cherished the exquisite clockwork, never realizing the clock had no heart to chime the hours. And now, we were left to live with its precise, silent, and endless ticking. Dr. Vance's verdict, the cold equations, became the quiet truth of our home. Elena wasn't broken, she was built differently. We were the ones learning a new, harsh language. Graduation was a ceremony in her honor, valedictorian. The applause felt like a public verdict on our private ruin. We celebrated nothing. Summer was a ghost season. Elena prepared for Stanford with sterile efficiency, creating shared calendars and packing protocols. Leo escaped to a friend's cabin. Robert and I moved through the rooms, strangers bound by a shared catastrophe. The day we left her at the airport was bright. Her goodbyes were procedural. Leo's hug was stiff, Robert's desperate. When I held her, I felt her allow it, her arms a loose, practiced circle. I poured a lifetime of love into that embrace, a final, hopeless transmission into the void. Goodbye, Mother. Goodbye, Elena. She walked through security and didn't look back. Not from cruelty. There was simply no operational reason to. The silence she left behind was deep and clean. Leo slowly returned to himself, his mess a comfort. Robert and I began the slow work of finding each other in the wreckage. The Sunday calls came at 7 sharp. Her updates were flawless status reports. We performed our parts. Then, a November call. The background was unfamiliar. A strand of hair was out of place. I have encountered an anomaly, she began. Her physics partner, overwhelmed by a breakup, failed to submit their project. Elena completed it alone, submitted it under her name, and he received a 0. Now he'd mobilized their peers against her. They called her inhuman. The label is factually incorrect, but socially damaging, she said, her voice etched with pure analytical frustration. My calculations accounted for his emotional volatility. I offered him efficiency strategies. He refused. He called me a robot. She paused. I am not a robot. I make logical choices. Why is logic met with rejection? It was the first crack in her armor, not of feeling, but of understanding. Her perfect model had failed to predict the illogical human backlash. Because logic without empathy feels like cruelty, I said, the old ache swelling, even when it isn't meant to be. So the optimal strategy is to simulate mercy? To add an illogical forgiveness variable to preserve social standing? Robert made a pained sound. It's not about simulation. I cannot feel what he feels, she stated, the absolute truth laid bare. My model was insufficient. The call ended with her intent to recalibrate. We sat in the gathering dark. This was the final, unchangeable consequence. Our blind faith in her perfection had blinded us to her profound solitude. We had raised a mind of exquisite logic, forever adrift in a sea of feeling it could model but never share. She wasn't evil. She was a lonely star, emitting light in a spectrum no one else could see. Our punishment was to love her, and to know she receives that love only as a proven data point of kinship investment, a steady, cold signal in the silence where she lives. The equations govern her, and we are left outside, forever tracing their perfect, heartless lines. The winter of Elena's first year at Stanford passed in a series of flawless, hollow video calls. Her recalibration after the peer retaliation incident was visible. She began her updates with a new, scripted query. And how are you feeling about that, Mother? The question was always perfectly timed, grammatically correct, and utterly vacant. It was like being asked about your emotional state by a sophisticated voice assistant. I'd give my rote, sanitized answer, I'm fine, just tired, and watch her note it with a slight, satisfied nod, as if logging a successful protocol execution. Leo started college the following fall, a state school close to home. His departure was a warm, messy affair of forgotten chargers and last-minute laundry and promises to call whenever. The house felt different without him, emptier, but the emptiness was natural, a quiet after a storm. We missed his noise. Elena declared a dual major in computational neuroscience and ethics. It is the study of decision-making frameworks in biological systems, she explained, and the philosophical parameters for optimal societal function. Of course, she was formally studying how to build a better heuristic for humanity. She didn't come home for Thanksgiving. She had secured a coveted research assistant position over the break. The opportunity cost of travel is too high, she said. We ate a quiet meal, just Robert and I, and pretended it wasn't a relief. The change, when it came, was so subtle we almost missed it. It was a regular Sunday call in early spring. She was describing a logic puzzle in her philosophy seminar. Suddenly she stopped. It reminds me of a paradox Leo posed when he was 11. He asked if a tree that fell in a forest with no one to hear it would make a sound, and then immediately said it would because the squirrels would hear it and be pissed off. She delivered the memory verbatim, without sentiment. It was an illogical leap from epistemology to mammalian emotional response, but it was creatively efficient. Robert and I froze. She had never voluntarily recalled a childhood memory before. It was always us, dragging anecdotes into the conversation like offerings. He was a funny kid, Robert managed, his voice thick. Yes, Elena said. Then, after a beat, his humor has a high success rate for mood elevation in social groups. I have analyzed its patterns. It wasn't nostalgia. It was, as ever, analysis. But she had pulled the memory from her own archives, unprompted. She had deemed it relevant. A few weeks later, she called on a Thursday, not Sunday. Robert answered, panicked. Is everything operational? He asked, the old fear rising. Yes, I am calling to inform you that I have been accepted to present a paper at an interdisciplinary conference. My topic is modeling affective nuance in axiological systems. That's wonderful, honey, he said, the pride automatic if confused. The conference is in the city. I have calculated that a hotel is less cost-effective than utilizing my former residence for 2 nights. Would this be acceptable? She was asking to come home. Not for a holiday, not for a performance, for a logistical convenience. When she arrived, she was the same. poised, precise, a visitor in her own home. She presented her paper to us at the kitchen table, slides flashing with dense graphs. It was, as far as I could tell, a staggeringly complex attempt to mathematically model the societal value of concepts like grace and forgiveness. The second night, I found her in Leo's old room. It was now a guest room/gym, but Leo's faded dinosaur decal was still half peeled on one wall. She wasn't touching it. She was just standing there, looking at it. "I remember his insistence on this thematic decor," she said, sensing me. "It was non-optimal for resale value, but it was a fixed variable in his childhood satisfaction." "It made him happy," I said. "Yes," she turned. "I am beginning to understand that some illogical variables have a persistent, non-quantifiable output, like that decal or Leo's joke about the squirrel. They are data points that resist clean integration but recur in the model." My breath caught. This was her version of a breakthrough, not a feeling, but a recognition of a pattern she couldn't fully solve. She left the next morning. At the door, she hesitated, a true, unscripted pause. "Thank you for the logistical support," she said. Then she added, "The familiar environment had a stabilizing effect on my preparation, more than projected." It was the closest she would ever come to saying it felt like home. After she left, I went to her old room, now a clean, generic office. I opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the one where I'd found the ledger a lifetime ago. Tucked at the very back, behind folders, was a single sheet of paper. It was a flowchart, elegantly hand-drawn in her precise script. The title, Interpersonal Friction, Mitigation versus Value Retention. At the top, an input, family unit, source, high investment, high complexity. Arrows led to decision diamonds, logical action, expected emotional response, deviation. Deviation equals yes led to a process box. Analyze memory archive for analogous illogical persistent variables. An arrow from that box circled back to the start, a feedback loop. She wasn't feeling her way towards us. She was engineering a way out, building a bridge, bolt by painful bolt, out of the only material she had, the cold, hard data of our shared history. She was using the memories she'd once logged as tactical assets as the foundation for a new, stable structure. It was not a thaw. It was a calculation, a deliberate, conscious choice to preserve a system whose value she could not feel, but had logically deduced was essential. The love she could not experience, she had decided to maintain. I put the paper back. The consequence of our blind judgment was now a permanent, quiet evolution. We had raised a creature of logic, and her logic had led her, in a roundabout, heartbreaking way, back to the table. She would never cry at Little Women, but she might study why others do and why that matters, and she might, just might, choose to sit beside us while we watched it. It was not the connection we'd dreamed of. It was a different kind of fidelity, built not on shared warmth, but on a stubborn, rational decision to stay within each other's orbit. A cold equation, yes, but one whose solution, against all odds, was family.